we have about an hour to kind of unpack some things from Heidi's lecture, kind of share our own thoughts and set you up for success, as they say. I would like to collect some first responses here and then also see if there's immediate urgent questions to Heidi's lecture from anybody in the room, and then we'll kind of take it from there as it goes. Heidi, may I start with you? I was wondering if you could situate your talk a bit, kind of where does it come from, how did you get to these ideas, what is sort of the intellectual path behind you?
I would say that when I was living in Europe, actually, that's when I wrote Algorithmic Necropolitics, which was my experience as an African person moving through borders and understanding about the digital, let's say, paper trail that existed that restricted my freedom of movement. That was one of the initial things. And then I did start my PhD exploring a kind of connection between African cosmologies and technology. And then eventually, when I was working for ZAM, Sean and I were having some discussions about a project we could do together. And we really thought that this idea of how cultures that exist outside of this idea of what the meta-narrative of what tech is, which is, you think of Silicon Valley, you think of, big tech and white billionaires, and we were kind of thinking, how does technology operate when it's not in that space? And so Glitching the Future came out of those conversations between Sean and myself, and also with Bubblegum Club being, it's like a youth publication, and it exists quite a lot online, on social media platforms. It's really popular. So we're really interested in the cultures that sort of emanate from outside of the mainstream narrative about what tech is.
The lecture, there were so many takeaways from it, but I think what really stood out to me is the idea of invention versus extraction, and how technology, in fact, does have this kind of physical footprint that is very much overlooked or kind of conveniently kind of put to the back burner. And how data, in fact, is a data center. It's not necessarily this kind of concept that is in isolation. And it also then made me think about, for example, digital platforms and how they are created with biases in mind and with their own sort of implications. They're not this neutral space in which you would think, okay, it's going to work for everyone. It's not. It's going to work for who designed them. So then how can you kind of give agency to everyone, give care when thinking about these things, and also kind of face the machine and acknowledge its shortcomings so that we can kind of move forward. That was kind of my response, and also what we were working on when we were working with Glitch was how can we not necessarily eradicate what is, but my interpretation is not necessarily eradicate what is, but in order to move forward, we need to physically start doing the work and physically glitching and intervening and confusing, making mistakes and doing things, but there needs to be kind of like something that's more actionable, and that was something that resonated with me with the Glitching project as well.
Just want to thank Heidi. Thank you so much, Heidi. I also want to thank all of you for staying laptop free for so long. So that's all credit to Heidi, I think. So well done. Yeah, I think what I got is this real important message that art, research, and social engagement are not three separate domains that we occasionally link up for the sake of strategic planning, curriculum design, or job CVs. And that Heidi's presentation showed us that research is always engaged. And the worst kind of myth you can spread is to pretend that your research is not, that your research is objective. And then to slip into, therefore, it's scientific, therefore, it's objective. And when I engage in politics or with artistic endeavours, I'm doing something separate. I think you really showed by the 360-degree move around the compass from the earth to the silicon, to the beautiful machines, back to the earth. But all through the talk, We don't see them, but we hear the human bodies and the human minds. And those human bodies and minds are not ours. They're those people who've actually died and are suffering now in stuffy little rooms somewhere in Nairobi, checking out all the crap that's online that you never get to see. So in that sense, I thought it was very powerful to link art, research and social engagement and being transparent about it. So thank you very much.
Very poetic response.
Senka, do you want to raise your question? Or?
My question is a bit of a basic one, but maybe it gives us a good start. And how do you see technology, and are there different sort of ways of how we can think what technology is? From a tool towards algorithms, and how did we move through that trajectory that we have a very different or very specific visual understanding of what it is, given the whole spectrum of what technology is and how it has supported humans. Yeah, thanks.
I think, yes, technology, you can think of it as a tool, but I think the narrative of what technology is read as in mainstream culture is limited, because then we do think computer or smartphone, which are tools and useful tools. But I really like this thinker called Clapperton Mavunga from MIT. He's a Zimbabwean. And he uses this idea of the hunter and his hunting tools as technology. He thinks of the hunter as a technologist. And so that's a way that I sort of used to rethink or reimagine how we can think of technology. There's also this thinker called Ron Eglash who writes about African fractals. So if you think about African hair, for example, we have lots of braiding technologies where fractals are reflected in the designs. Even if you go aerially above African villages, you can see that there's a fractal design even within that. So there's mathematics in pre-colonial African cultures. There's technology in pre-colonial African cultures. So I like to expand it. Like, I obviously love my computer and my smartphone, but I'm more interested in inventing from a place where I'm not limited by that one trajectory of what tech is.
Thank you very much. Let's go into, we have, I think, two themes to talk about: Europe's futures and sort of decolonizing Europe. Let's start with Europe's futures first, or futures. I'm not sure if we should say plural or singular. Where are we headed? Let's just start with the big, maybe anxious question. What is Europe's future or futures like? Who wants to start?
Well, we're on a road to nowhere, if I may quote a middle career Talking Heads song, quite frankly. And what do we mean by Europe? Do we mean the Holy Roman Empire? Do you mean the EU minus the UK, plus the UK? Do you mean the Council of Europe, 46, or now was it 47, till Russia got kicked out? Do we talk about the Third Reich? Which Europe do we mean? Because for every future we discuss, there are deeply contested paths that are currently being fought out in national elections, regional elections, student elections, in university boards. So I think for me that's the thing, that's the elephant in the room, as in what is this Europe? Because the EU likes to talk about Europe, but the EU is not Europe in the larger sense, I think. And of course, what is European? So in that sense, I just want to sort of start there, because if we think Eurocultures, which I did history as well, but the European Union has, I've counted them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we'll count UK for now, 7, 8, 9, 10. At least 10 former empires. So 50% of the European Union itself, nation states, are former empires. Belgian, Portuguese, you could just list them. So this is something, this historical reality, empirical reality, that's still in living memory. So the point about the Congo is very, very important, because Belgium's former imperial rule is still very much alive and being contested even now. Reparations being demanded, Ketikoti coming up on Wednesday, the Dutch kingdom as it's still called. So all this is in play, I think. I'll stop there. Just want to throw that out there right now.
I think I was thinking of this idea of interconnectivity. I think, when I look at any human being, I'm seeing myself. I think we're all a reflection of each other, and whatever you see should be a lesson about your own self. So I think of Europe as a microcosm of the world. I see it as perhaps geographically inaccessible, but in my vision of the world, I am also European, and Europeans are also African. Those are divisions that I don't think are necessary to my vision of what being a human being is. So yeah, I respond to Europe from a place of love, actually, even though there's a lot of historical things that are embarrassing. But I really come from a place of reaching out and trying to sort of repair a relationship with myself, essentially.
How do people respond to that when you say, I'm European, or I feel...
Obviously not positively, but that doesn't shake my confidence in because I think if I love outward, then I love myself even better, and I think those are, if we talk about decoloniality, that is a breaking down of a very capitalistic and colonial regime, right, which insists that somebody is existing in a hierarchy, and to dismantle that is to choose love, is to choose even rage, to choose connectivity, to choose the erotic, to choose sex, to choose joy, and I don't think it's weak enough to be dismantled by somebody being unhappy that I call myself something that they don't want me to call myself.
I think what I find intriguing about Europe is that it feels like it can't really exist as 100% purebred Europe because it's so connected with its immigrant communities, with its diaspora communities. There's almost like a network in which everything kind of moves. And I think the proposed Europe needs to be Europe. It's almost not even realistic anymore. And it's similar in Africa, where we can't posit what it would look like if we were not colonized. We have to move forward knowing that there's certain things that we take with us, but it doesn't necessarily make us less African. We are embracing that we are multicultural, multifaceted, and we allow certain things to shape us the way we choose to. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see kind of like this selective kind of nationalism, I guess, for Europe, because for example, everyone loves a kapsalon, and that is very much a hybrid and a combining and a connection of two cultures. So yeah, it's hard to see people kind of divorce kind of connection from moving forward, because that's, I think, how we propel forward.
I also just want to challenge this idea that connection means sameness. It doesn't. Even this idea of multiculturalism, which I know Dutch people love, I don't necessarily believe in that. I think really being connected is understanding also what you're not. So yes, we're different, and yes, there are going to be tensions and things that we don't vibe with each other on. But if we really engage with that, I think that brings us closer, rather than saying, oh no, everyone's the same, everyone's, we're all just one, I think connection depends on acknowledging farness as well.
Could you say maybe a bit more about that? Because I was thinking indeed about, we have, I think, shared interests in Europe or in the world. We heard a couple of things, climate change, for example, making it a very pressing issue, or maybe AI is becoming one of those issues. So there are shared interests, but there's also so many divisions or differences. I think those are probably different things as well. How do we work towards those shared interests across those definitions or divisions and differences?
Maybe acknowledging that the interests aren't shared.
Yeah.
Yes. the hardest thing to agree upon in international settings is the detail. So one way to really challenge, to be kind of glitchy, if you like, if I can borrow the term, is to insist on detail, even while you know that there are larger pictures at stake. So the whole discourse around Europe is really problematic at the moment. It's it's mono-ethnic, it's monocultural, basically. It's Rembrandt to Michelangelo and back. Great stuff, by the way, but there's also other really great stuff. It's monoclass, it's monogender, and we know this because all of us are living as we see these polarizations. So I think if we are engaged intellectuals and students and working academics, then pick the topic, pick the issue, and then try and sort of keep it granular but also keep the context.
But
would that work, or was that also too complicated?
Yeah, my thing is, I think by choosing one common interest, that's where we that's when the noise erupts.
Yeah,
because
exactly, yeah.
Who's going to pick something? We don't have the same interests,
exactly.
I think. It's almost like if you look at, for example, feminism, like what is equitable? Do you know what I mean? And I feel like equitable isn't equal. It's more just like, what can we do for what we want? So I feel like glitching is interesting because it's like these mini interventions that still keep the train moving. Like someone's doing this, someone's doing that, someone's doing something else. But the hope is that it is propelling forward. And like many movements together can still get it going, as opposed to us taking a year to discuss and debate and go into different parliamentary things off of the same topics that aren't really what people are interested in at a mass level.
Yeah.
So it's complicated though. That's the problem, is it's very complicated. But I think acknowledging that we don't have the same interests, but if I'm interested in something, I want to put in the work to better that thing. And if everyone just starts to better the thing that interests them positively, then maybe we can get somewhere.
Who do you mean when you say we don't have the same interests?
Yeah, I think maybe then there has to be a sense of like within your communities, with the people, because there are people who maybe are interested in what you're interested in. Within our little micro groups, can we do something together to progress? But yeah, I think it is tough from an organizational perspective. I do think it's like a very tough question to put forward of like, how can we move forward as one? Because for me, the as one is the part where I'm like, okay, this feels a bit too heavy to even begin.
To become one, that's too big of a...
It seems like quite a big project. I mean, society's been around for how long? And it's many wars where you're just kind of like, one is this, one is that, but it's never been one. So how are we still trying to homogenize something?
Why would we want to homogenize? I think this is what you're speaking to. Why? Homogenize milk? Well, we don't know anything else except homogenized milk, for instance, if I can stretch the metaphor, but that's a very dairy-related metaphor from someone who comes from a country obsessed with dairy. But anyway, the point is, this idea that becoming one, and this is the discourse I think we need to push up against. For instance, the University of Groningen strategic plans all mentioning AI. We've got data autonomy projects. I'm part of the editorial board of the yearbook on data autonomy, otherwise known as YODA. Got it? I'm too young. All these things are trying to sort of find different ways to use the technologies, to build the technologies. The hardware particularly, though, remains deeply colonialized. The hardware is rooted in the global south. And the software is developed and the phones are manufactured on the seashores of mainland China. So these issues you can actually think about as a student, as a teacher, in terms of your curriculum. Data centers, I popped it into a first year BA class and discovered I had a number of students who live in Winchculture, where there's a huge data center. So it was a really easy day. You know, they knew exactly what a data center does to their hometown. But what they didn't get is that that data center is furnishing the cloud that they're equally dependent on. So those connections still need to be made. And climate change, so there are particular issues that you can unite on in a sort of, if you like, guerrilla kind of way. It can't be everything all at once, all the time, everyone the same. To me, that's how the Council of Europe talks. I've been in many of those meetings. What you try and get Azerbaijan and Russia and Turkey to agree But they did sign, the Council of Europe set up, and all those member states signed the Convention on Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. So there can be agreement. But the tricky bit is finding a pathway forward. So we can actually, in our universities, focus on topics and perhaps if we're thinking from decolonial perspectives or post-colonial perspectives, try and make the connections that Heidi's lecture's done. Do the journey and have a look at the machine you're using and I'm using and ask yourself, okay, so I'm actually holding an iPhone that's made basically by indentured labour, which is the term you give to people who are underpaid and overworked. And this is the case, of course, because Apple's factories that assemble your iPhones are in southeastern borderland China. So all those little concrete examples really help focus us. The trick is, all the demagogues and the populists want to blur all that and talk about one project, Boreal Europa. Blur it, make it as fuzzy as possible. And that's very digestible, because the rice pop is really, really lekker. But if you can get to the granular stuff, then you can start doing some real research that just makes a difference, because you know more than you did before. And that's the start.
May I stay with something that you said? I was reminded of something the Bulgarian writer Georgi Gospodinov talks about. Is you have nostalgia. We all know there's nostalgia in Europe. And if it happens on a personal level, that's okay, right? We all think back to our childhood home or something. But when it happens on a collective level, when it's politicized into some of the things that you were saying, Marianne, then it becomes dangerous. And I think you were saying in different wording kind of the same thing. I was wondering if we have more thoughts on how do you deal with this nostalgia and the pessimism, the turn away from the future that seems so prevalent.
I think with technology, for just to bring my own background in, I got into technology and issues around technology because I was a pessimist. So I was like, okay, what is this all about? I want to learn about it so that I'm more informed about the ways in which to know why it makes me so pessimistic. And in going on that journey, I realized that technology broken down is just people. It's about people, and it's about people wanting to do things, wanting to say something, wanting to instruct something, but it's always going to be people. A phone has a person behind it, a website has a person behind it, it's all people-led. So I think that's what then made me more interested in it, and I was like, okay, if I take it back to it being a person and it being a personal thing that affects me and I can affect it, what do I want to see and how do I want to affect it? And that's kind of what switched it around for me. It was kind of bringing it back down to something tangible again, because it's very easy for it to get lost in the algorithm and the all of these bulky terms and the matrix, all of those things. But when you bring it down to the granular, tangible level, okay, this is something that I influence, that influences me. Let's make this a positive experience. And that's kind of what turned my pessimism around and kind of began this journey of how can I intervene positively on tech? So that's kind of what I think needs to happen, where you kind of bring it back down to it being about people and for people.
So would you say you're an optimist now, or is the journey still ongoing?
It's a journey. It's a wave. It's a wave. But I think when you can understand that you have biases, and because it's about people and personal experiences can affect it, I think that awareness makes me feel okay, at least the awareness is there. The pessimism comes in when there is none of that awareness behind those kinds of machines and that thinking, because then you have certain concepts, for example, AI, which in theory is a helpful tool, but in practice is now a multi-billion dollar thing where it's got paywalls. It's optimized for money and not necessarily for the thing it was supposed to do. So that's when it's kind of I would love for people to be a bit more aware of their biases and aware of also the implications of their creations sometimes.
just going back to this idea of connectivity, I think right now people are unhappy. I think that what we're seeing with the rise of fascism and swift move to the right, this idea that the past was better than now, yes, it's a European problem, but being a South African, there's a lot of anti-immigration sentiment over there too. So I actually see it as a global thing, and it brings me back to this moment of like the oneness of everything, like understanding how the world is revolving through a lens that tells us that what's happening in one place is a microcosm of what's happening not just globally but cosmically. And I think the cosmos is telling us this isn't working. Like there's some things need to change. You need to make this better. And wanting the past, romanticizing the past, probably is a symptom, I would say maybe even a good one. That's a controversial take, but maybe we're desiring something that we used to be connected to, Ultimately, I would say maybe it's nature, I'm not a Luddite in any sense, but I love technology, but I do think we lost something in this like endlessly progressive like state that we're in, that capitalism tells us like bigger, more, and I think that's nostalgia is telling us it's an instinct, like a human and natural instinct that's saying you do kind of need to take a few steps back. We're doing it wrong, but I do think there's something in that I would like us to lean into in a much less repressed and stressed out way.
I think also nostalgia to me sometimes signals an anxiety towards a lack of control.
Right.
And I think technology tends to snowball, and we aren't able to kind of grasp or control. Yeah. And like you said, if we could just embrace and free ourselves of that control, then that could be something to work with, as opposed to now having this anxious reaction to the lack of control and then trying to fight that with more control.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that because, of course, the technologies we're talking about here are particular devices that connect us to other people via something called the internet, which is an infrastructure, using designs, which is software that allows us to produce all sorts of fancy, exciting, lurid content. So back when I started, I was looking at a bunch of young kids, undergrads growing up in Long Island, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Los Angeles, in Melbourne and Sydney, a few scattered in main New Zealand cities, very lonely, wanting to connect to home, which was Tonga, Samoa, Cook Islands, and they discovered there was something called the internet, or the World Wide Web. So a guy called Tahoro Kami, who was an engineering or business student in Atlanta, he wanted to watch the rugby scores, because the Tongans basically win all New Zealand's rugby tournaments. So if he did, he designed an online community, a bulletin board system, which basically is what Facebook, when it launched its radical design, is based on. So there, the connectivity was there. So these high school students and high school students and university students got really involved with communicating with each other, talking about what their culture was or wasn't, recuperating the past as contested pasts, pushing back against Tonga's monarchy, one of the last absolute monarchies on the planet at the time, and saying, hey, what you're telling us in school isn't quite right. Are pushing back against the Mormon and Seventh-day Adventist and Catholic churches that had completely ruled the lives of young Tongans and Samoans. So this was an enormous opportunity back in the mid-90s. And it burgeoned and it became a political movement because journalists were deeply repressed in Tonga, particularly at the time. And they were living in various kinds of exile around the Pacific. So how did they connect up when they were back home? They were sent home often to be redisciplined. It's a very strict society. They hung out in the Royal Institute for Science and connected. I was thinking about, you think about electricity, connected via a decommissioned Russian satellite, because there aren't any undersea cables through the Pacific yet. And so they hooked up, and when the power went, they just sat around a bit like that photo you showed. That's why these designs are so powerful. That's why Zuckerberg's design is so powerful. It's tapping into a deep human desire is to be part of a community. And if you're living away from home and that community is the other side of the planet, then these are fantastic devices and technologies. They've saved more than a few lives. Of course, they've created stress and upset and other awfulness, but let's not forget that. So it isn't just a simple either or at all, ever. And you and your research can help us unpack some of the more detailed issues around good, bad, and different.
We're discussing now the connectivity between Europe and Africa, but in that whole technology discussion, isn't the main extractor these days no longer Europe, isn't it China? That common value system, is that not completely outdated when we're talking about extraction for technology, because it's no longer Europe?
Okay, so I think that's an amazing question, and I think it's something that, even though I didn't necessarily explore it in my presentation, it's something I'm extremely vividly aware of. On the continent, we would usually call it neocolonialism, because definitely there's a huge presence and mobilization of extraction from China. But I wouldn't necessarily say that Europe is then out of the picture, right? Because yes, China is the new extractor, or a new extractor, but China isn't selling those devices to themselves, right? Right? There still is a chain that demands a certain player, which is what ultimately makes China so powerful economically right now, right? If the West wasn't engaging with China at all, China wouldn't be what China is right now, right? So a lot of these devices actually do end up in the same place which they would have if they had also been extracted by European entities. So I do see what you're saying, and I actually agree, and I think African people in particular need to pay special attention to this dynamic. And I think there are actually a lot of differences. Chinese interactions with African people are operating and resulting in different kinds of relationships, different kinds of cultures, because China isn't Europe, right? And so there's new problems to solve, and we have to find new solutions for that kind of extraction. But I don't think that then we say, okay, Europe is out of the picture, right? And that's responding to the current moment, but I also do believe that time is cyclical. I don't believe that the past has happened and now we're in the present and the future will come. I think those are all connected, and I think it's very important for us to even look back and say the extractions that happened by Europe in the past still need to be engaged with in the present and will affect the future as well. You know, so that will never not be part of the story of Africa and the story of the relationship between Africa and Europe, but it is still, even as China enters and takes over this extractive logic, it is still, Europe is still part of that meta-narrative.
Just wanted to say, to have something in common doesn't mean that it's mono. The Council of Europe is not a monoculture. It's 46 very, very different nations. The European Union is not a monoculture, even though it may present itself as such. But we can discuss that further, because we're getting into ideology here maybe. And that's my ideology, is that monoculture, it doesn't match on to having things in common. You decide you have things in common, or you find you have things in common across difference. It's not about erasing difference. China in Africa, yes, good point. And I like the way you're suggesting that maybe China's behaving better, though these comparisons can be rather dubious for historical analysis. But they're giving, arguably, China's arguably been giving more in terms of investment for the last 20 years than Europe ever did. You could argue, and there is research, that China's a lot more astute about how it presents itself as an ally, hence its success, apart from the fact it has acres of money. I take Heidi's point that the West, particularly Silicon Valley and the other tech bros, are working very closely together with China. Huawei is through all our telecom systems. So these are, you really got to look at some of the empirical kind of facts and figures, if you like, because they both diverge from the narratives we're being told, but also can inform new narratives. But also Pan-Africanism. And we now, may I plug the book? In Internet Decolonize, here are the proofs. We have a chapter about digital Pan-Africanism, returning to the very complex and sometimes controversial legacies of great thinkers from the early generation of decolonial Africa when they became nominally independent states. So there's a lot of kind of stuff we have to do to get our facts straight so that our narrative match. But perhaps going around a little bit in circles, but I don't want to give the impression that it's an either or either. The fact the European Union still manages to get anything done is amazing. But the one thing they all seem to agree on is vicious anti-immigration policies deploying American and Israeli designed surveillance tools that pushes so-called border controls out into North Africa, Libya, Morocco. So these new detention centres, now speaking to a former research project I was in a consortium, they're being pushed out. So Europe's borders are forever being extended in this quest to keep the other, capital O, capital not white, capital not Christian, not Catholic, not Protestant, keep them out, and if you let them in, only on our terms. So therefore you need this sort of large narrative of who we might be. So I'm going to be really tough today. I'm not letting anybody off the hook here. Sorry.
I think
Be warned.
quickly on Heidi's point also of Europe not necessarily being absolved because it has to look at its past also and then kind of work in tandem with the future and the present. I think for me, I'm hesitant to kind of say Europe is not doing anything because I think Europe needs to look at what are the existing relationships they have with the continent of Africa. And for me, it still feels extractive because none of those relationships are in partnership. It's still very much extracting, and there's no equity, there's no equal distribution of those resources that result from, like, there's no apple that is making Congo richer. No. So it's still something that to me seems like something that Europe can look towards and reassess, looking at if you want to kind of absolve yourself or seem better than China, look at those partnerships and those relationships because they're not partnerships. They're still very much extractive.
The present looks more like the past and the future we would want. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How would one manifest a glitch in the policy system, policy cycle, at a time when the vast majority of the population does not want to see any such glitch? The population is just perfectly fine with how things are going when it comes to, rebalancing or rebalancing their connections across all sorts of parts of the world. So how do you manifest such a glitch?
How do we manifest it practically? And I'm going to give you some examples. My most favorite example is sonic, right? I talked about black sonic traditions, and South Africa is a great example, but generally you could say genres like Afrobeats, gqom to amapiano, these result from African traditions, right? They come from the conditions which are poverty, basically, right? People have invented new genres like amapiano and gqom from stolen software, right? Because they couldn't afford to go into studios and record music, right? So they had to buy software, steal software, right? And through that, they've now changed the face of what music is globally through amapiano, right? It's a genre that's invented through a lack, through being left out of a certain system, and people saying, okay, you're not going to give us the conditions to be able to go to a studio and record professionally, we're going to steal it. We're going to actually just make our own music, and it's going to sound so weird and different that it's going to change the world, right? That manifested in an economic change for many, many people. There's people touring the world, people like Black Coffee, who's a South African DJ. He's mainly based in Ibiza, right? So new conditions are being created for everyday South African people through breaking something in the system and saying, if I'm going to be on the margins, let me see what I can produce from the margins, and that changes the lives of people, right? Black Twitter, right? Black Twitter, it's a space where people have actually created new communities from that exclusion, right? They're not included in things like manosphere, for example, things like trad wives. You can't be a trad wife really if you're black, right? So then people create their own worlds and have actually designed a system where now there's a new culture, like there's a black TikTok or black talk, right? So new things emerge from existing in the margins where people refuse to sort of see that as exclusion and decide to engage that exclusion as a sort of generative part. Going back to the manosphere, these memes exist where people are sort of reacting to people, let's say like Nick Fuentes or who's that other guy? Andrew Tate, right. So you can look at that and say, okay, these guys hate us because, okay, we're black or we're women or whatever, and just leave that. But then reaction channels sprout up. People create memes to make fun of these people, you know, so then generative things begin to happen by people not following that path of saying, okay, fine, we're not part of the mainstream, you know? So those are just practical examples of how people have been able to change their lives through that exclusion. What I will say though, is if you are in the mainstream, then we exclude you from the glitch, right? You can't glitch from the mainstream. You have to be outside of the center in order to engage with the glitch. And so therefore, it can be difficult to see how you can manifest a glitch because you're not glitching, right?
So in that sense, Heidi, the glitch can never be colonized.
Exactly. That's why it's so essential.
Good point. Remember that.
For example, okay, one last example. There's a stereotype that says white people can't dance, right? Because dancing, especially when it comes to black music, it depends on that gap. It depends on that, what Fred Moulton calls the fall, right? White people can't do that. They need a system. They need something that allows them to follow the rules, right? And so dancing for black people is glitching, right? It's a physical manifestation of moving in the in-between. Yeah?
I think he's going to take a dance class.
It's a stereotype. It's not necessarily true. I'm just saying, it's a stereotype. It's hard to even conceive of it, but I'm very ambitious about this shit. And I'm thinking big, right? It's easy for me to address big tech because I can see Elon Musk, right? I can see, okay, this guy, he's a Nepo baby because of mining, and then he becomes the richest man on earth. Fine, we need to shift that, and we need to change this idea of Silicon Valley and tech bros being the ones who hold technological power. But I also, like you say, I also am looking at paradigms. I'm also thinking about us as humanity, and also cosmically, there is something that does need to shift, right? And I think things like glitching are maybe not the only way. I hope we'll find better ways. This is, you know, a shot in the dark because the problem is so big, but there does need to be a paradigm shift. I don't think we're going in the right direction as humans. And I'm ambitious enough to have the audacity to say, I'm going to put an idea out there that could potentially shift the way we see the world.
There's some very famous books from the 1970s, one called Small is Beautiful by Schumacher. And these thinkers and activists understood technological and social change from the micro level. So no, you can't compete right now. Afghanistan has its own kind of geopolitical stresses and strains. So I think that's a political question and a policy question you're asking. And there are many theories about which is the best way forward. I'm not sure whether you want to go for finding another service provider or finding another way to create a network. There are community networks. We can talk later. Latin America is full of community networks. There's also a chapter in the book, Internet Decolonized. But community networks that devise link-ups with computers that are not dependent on big tech. And there you could probably start in the Afghan situation. Small networks with small transponders using DIY and cobbled together technologies, and you can create a computer-to-computer network quite quickly. So there are technical ways to do it and there are social ways to do it. So yes, you can compete, but you have to start at the community level and build it yourself. By the way, Afghanistan's been, some of Afghanistan's former political or policy people, I've seen at UN conferences looking for finance to finance their telecom networks. So it happens at the high level as well, but also from the point of view of rural and poorer communities in Afghanistan. Don't wait for central government. Get on with it, do it yourselves. DIY lives.
How do you think the future will look in the sense when US big tech or Europe no longer trusts US big tech now? And do you think this will bring improvement to the world, or will Europe just create their own alternatives which will replicate the US big tech?
What I find the most problematic is the European Union wants to replace American big tech with EU big tech. Does that make a better world? We have to look at the fundamental principles upon which we're working and living and communicating. So that's a whole middle area in the policy debates and the designs that have been put in place. Europe wants to compete with the US in terms of microchip production, AI chip production, the AI fabric that's coming to Groningen. So the whole way they're doing it is to create a parallel competitor. I don't think that's the answer, but from a policy point of view, it might be. But it's just reproducing the same problem. Yeah. Climate guzzling, electricity guzzling, community destroying, also that we can hook up at midnight, which is pretty cool, but there are sustainable and better designs out there. And the EU should be subsidising and funding those real green designs, not pretend ones. No more greenwashing, EU.
Like EU versus US big tech, for me, again, we have to take it back to this digital infrastructure is physical property.
Yeah.
So I doubt they would annex an existing data center.
Speaking, she might go.
Oh, okay. I doubt they would annex an existing data center. It's just more data centers. It's more properties. And as someone coming from the African continent, my mind immediately goes to who is going to pay for that in land and in labor. Who is going to pay for that? And for what? If there's existing infrastructure already, why can we not kind of work together? So when it becomes a separate issue, it's also very abstract for me because as an African tech, what are we doing that? Like, you know what I mean? Like EU tech versus US tech, again, it's just a conversation that is above our heads. But somehow we're going to pay for it immensely. So yeah, that's why it just makes my skin crawl a bit.
So don't take it personally, our communal shudder.
Yeah, we did shudder. We did.
Yeah.
Maybe with Anna time, one last question. We'll take it from sort of furthest away to me to Heidi. We've heard Heidi, we've had our conversation today. Where are you going to go now, Marianne? What are you going to do?
Let's hook up with Heidi again and Leah again and check them out and do some work together if you're willing.
Yes, of course.
Yes. Go clubbing, go dancing.
Yes.
Go glitching.
Do some writing, go glitching. And all those really exciting things. Because we found we have a lot in common, however we're not the same.
Absolutely.
So that's my point. Thank you.
As someone who is very practice-based, I just want to do. That is what motivates me, it's just to do. Like, to practice through making, to make, to understand through making, through doing, to glitch, see what happens, glitch some more. I think for me, I sometimes have a hesitance towards the theoretical because it just feels like it's stalling. So for me, just doing. and connecting with people. Like for me, taking people are kind of they go together.
But like you said, you start small, right? So no matter how big your ambitions are, you gotta start where you are. And so I'm gonna go home. I've learned a lot during this trip. I'm very, very, very thankful to be here. And one of the biggest reasons is, as you saw, some of my students have very difficult material conditions, and it's sometimes hard for them to even imagine a world out there and the possibility of them accessing the world out there. So when I'm able to do it, I can see the shift in their eyes, thinking, okay, if you can do it and you're from where I'm from, then it's kind of possible, you know? And not only was I able to take this journey, but I know many people in this room are going to be leaders of tomorrow, you know, and I feel like something definitely will happen when I go back home and I tell my students what I was able to experience and the potential of that moment and the fact that they could do that too. That's already like change enough for me. That's what I'm going to do.
Thank you to all of you for being here, for your questions, but most of all, again, another round of applause for our panelists.